Have you ever had a coworker you only knew through video calls? Someone you talked to every day for months but never met in person? I did. His name was Chris, and for 3 months he seemed like the nicest guy on our team. Then something changed. This happened 6 months ago, and I still cover my laptop camera when I'm not using it. My name is Nina, and I work remotely for an American tech company from Hamburg, Germany. I live with my grandmother in her apartment. It's cheaper, and she enjoys the company. Because of the time difference, I work mostly night shifts, which suits me fine. Our team has daily video calls at 9 p.m. Hamburg time. That's 2 p.m. for most of my American colleagues. There are 6 of us, our manager Sarah in Boston, 2 developers in California, 1 designer in New York, me, and Chris. Chris was supposedly based in Little Rock, Arkansas. He joined the team about a month before me, and from day one, he seemed like the perfect coworker. Always pleasant, always prepared, great at his job. He had this slight southern accent and would make jokes about Arkansas weather or mention things like tending to his chickens in his backyard. He kept his video background set to this nice countryside scene, rolling hills and farmland, which made sense for rural Arkansas. Very professional setup. For the first couple of months, I really liked Chris. He was friendly without being pushy, remembered personal details people shared, and even helped me navigate some tricky client situations when I was still new. But gradually I started noticing small things that didn't quite add up. The first thing I noticed was the lighting. During our 9 p.m. calls, it would be completely dark outside my window in Hamburg, but it should have been mid-afternoon in Arkansas. Chris's room was always dim though, like he was working in the evening too. I figured maybe he just preferred working with the curtains closed, or had his office in a basement. People have different preferences, right? Then there were the little comments he'd make. Once, during small talk before a meeting started, I mentioned it was raining heavily in Hamburg, and Chris said, "Oh, we've got the same weather system here, really coming down." But when I checked the weather in Little Rock later, it had been sunny all day. Another time I complained about construction work outside my grandmother's building that had been keeping me up, and Chris nodded sympathetically and said, "Yeah, they're doing road work in my neighborhood too. All that drilling at night? But why would they do road construction at night in a small Arkansas town?" These were tiny things, and I told myself I was overthinking. Remote work can be isolating, and sometimes you read too much into casual conversations. But then about 2 months in, his video background glitched. We were in the middle of a presentation review when his fake countryside background suddenly cut out. For maybe 10 seconds, I could see his real environment behind him. Instead of Arkansas farmland, there was a window showing a dark cityscape with lights from tall buildings. Office buildings, apartment complexes, definitely not rural Arkansas. Chris quickly fixed his background, joking about technical difficulties, and the meeting continued. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Those city lights looked so familiar, but I couldn't place why. That night, after the call ended, I stood at my grandmother's living room window, looking out at Hamburg's skyline. The view was similar to what I'd glimpsed behind Chris, the same type of urban landscape, the same pattern of lights. But that was impossible. Chris lived in Arkansas. After the background glitch, I started paying closer attention to Chris during our calls. The more I watched, the more inconsistencies I noticed. He'd mentioned having fresh eggs from his chickens, but I'd caught glimpses of what looked like a small urban balcony behind him when his camera angle shifted. You can keep chickens in cities, I told myself, but something felt off. He talked about driving to the big city to run errands, but Little Rock isn't that small. And the driving distances he mentioned didn't match what I knew about Arkansas geography. Most unsettling were the local references that hit too close to home. He'd mentioned weather patterns that matched Hamburg exactly. Once, he complained about tourist crowds downtown during a week when Hamburg was hosting a major conference that had indeed made the city center crowded. When I looked it up, Little Rock hadn't had any major events that week. 3 weeks after the background glitch, Chris made a comment that made my blood run cold. I'd mentioned being frustrated because my favorite cafe near the Speicherstadt had closed unexpectedly. Chris nodded and said, "Yeah, I heard about that. Such a shame. They had great coffee." The Speicherstadt is Hamburg's historic warehouse district. It's not exactly international news when a small local cafe closes. I started making excuses to leave our video calls early. Something about Chris was fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. My grandmother noticed I was jumpy and asked if everything was okay at work. I told her I was just stressed about a difficult project. But late at night, when I was alone in the apartment working, I'd find myself glancing at my laptop camera. Even with it off, I felt like I was being watched. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening, and I'd finished work around midnight. Hamburg was having one of those heavy autumn rainstorms, the kind where you can hear the water hammering against the windows. My grandmother had gone to bed hours earlier, so I was alone in the apartment. I'd changed into my nightrobe, this distinctive burgundy silk one my grandmother had given me, and was making myself some tea before bed when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained a single photo. It was me standing in my grandmother's kitchen wearing my burgundy nightrobe. The photo had been taken from outside through the window just moments before. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I ran to the kitchen window and peered through the rain-streaked glass down at the street below. There, standing under a streetlight across from our building, was a man in a dark coat. Even through the rain and darkness, I could make out his face. It was Chris. He was looking directly up at our apartment, and when he saw me at the window, he smiled and gave a small wave. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. This wasn't possible. Chris lived in Arkansas. Chris had never been to Germany. Chris didn't know where I lived. But there he was, standing in the rain in Hamburg, watching my apartment. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They took my statement and said they'd patrol the area, but there wasn't much they could do based on one sighting and an anonymous text. I spent the rest of the night awake, checking the windows obsessively, but I didn't see him again. The next morning I was exhausted and terrified, but I logged in for our regular team call. Everyone was there except Chris. His usual spot in the video grid was empty. Halfway through the meeting, I couldn't take it anymore. "Where's Chris today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah, our manager, looked confused. "Chris, he hasn't been showing up to meetings for the past week. We've been trying to reach him, but all his contact information seems to be invalid." "What do you mean, invalid?" "Well, that's the strange thing. HR tried to contact him about his absence, but his phone number is disconnected, and all emails to his address bounced back. We're starting to think his employment information might have been fake." My stomach dropped. Fake how? His address references even his social security number. HR is having trouble verifying any of it. They're investigating, but it looks like we might have been dealing with identity theft. We've had to remove his access to all company systems. After the call ended, I sat staring at my laptop screen, trying to process what I'd learned. Chris, whoever he really was, had somehow infiltrated our company with fake credentials. He'd been in our meetings for months, listening to our conversations, learning details about our lives, and somehow he'd figured out where I lived. The police increased patrols around my grandmother's building for a few weeks, but Chris never appeared again. HR's investigation confirmed that everything about his employment had been fraudulent. Fake name, fake address, fake work history. I still work for the same company, but I've moved to a different apartment across the city. My grandmother understood when I explained that I needed more security for work reasons. The thing that haunts me most isn't just that Chris was watching me. It's how long he'd been doing it and how carefully he'd planned everything. He'd somehow researched our company, created a fake identity, and gotten himself hired just to, watch employees? Target specific people? I was probably just one of several targets. HR mentioned that 2 other remote employees had reported feeling like they were being watched, but nothing could be proven. Sometimes I wonder if Chris was his real name, or if the person I knew as Chris even exists anymore. Maybe he's moved on to another company, another identity, another group of unsuspecting remote workers. If you work remotely and have video calls with people you've never met in person, pay attention to the details. Notice if their lighting matches their supposed time zone. Listen for local knowledge they shouldn't have, and maybe invest in a good camera cover. Some colleagues are closer than you think.